Today we wrap up our series, the 10 Financial Commandments. We've been working through 10 different heart attitudes in regards to our finances. This series, we could just keep going and going and going and going. There's so many things to talk about. And I think it's been helpful for us as a church, helpful for us as individuals to kind of keep digging deeper into our own hearts and reflecting on this very important concept of money and what we do with it, because we live our day in and day out with making financial decisions, whether it's to buy an ice cream cone at Gigi's, or to invest money into a stock market, or to give to any ministry or ministry partner, or to the church, various ways in which our heart is intertwined, and learning about and being aware of how the heart can wrongly live in not good and healthy ways. And so that's what this series has been about. It's been about to expose those things. Today, the title of our message is to live with the final audit in mind. And I'm just going to begin by reading a few quotes and talking about an article from the New York Times that came, it's February 2022. And the next slide here will give you kind of a graphic of the title of the article and this little cartoon. So the title of the article is "You can take it with you if the grave is deep enough." And so that's an interesting picture, and you can kind of absorb that for a second. But the article is all about how people were buried with their vehicles. Buried with their vehicles. And so here's a little bit from the article. It says in 1977, so the author just kind of goes through a number of different stories. In 1977, Sandra West, a flamboyant Beverly Hills oil heiress, was buried with her baby blue 1964 Ferrari. Her grave is next to her husband's at Alamo Masonic Cemetery in San Antonio, and it's become a tourist attraction. And the author goes on to talk about Aurora Schrock, who was buried, interestingly, in Aurora, Indiana in 1989 with her red 1976 Cadillac Eldorado convertible. The author notes that the top was down, the coffin was placed over the rear seats, and 16 grave sites were required to bury her with her vehicle. And then the author talks about in 1994, George Swanson of our home state here, Pennsylvania, who had his ashes interred with his 1964 Corvette and cued in the cassette player. Get that cassette player, huh? Yeah, we don't have those anymore, right? An Engelbert Humperdinck tape. And most of us don't even know who he is, because we're not that old. And then in 2009, Lonnie Holloway was buried in his 1973 Pontiac, went into the ground together in South Carolina. His sister said it's something he always wanted to do, but she didn't really like the idea. And on. The article is just about all these interesting stories. There's many more of people who were buried with their vehicles. Kind of took me back to history class and the Egyptians and mummies and being buried with stuff. But what caught my attention most about the article wasn't all those interesting and unique stories, but was the title. The title, which reads, "You can take it with you." You can take it with you. You can take it with you. That's interesting. And that's exactly what the Egyptians, seemingly, like as a kid, as I read about the Egyptians, it seemed as though that's what they were attempting to do, right? So they would bury with the mummy jewelry and food and even canoes and little trinkets and figurines and in my young mind, I just thought this is ridiculous. Like, why would you bury things with people that somebody else could be using? It doesn't make any sense. And then this notion that somehow that it's going to be of benefit to you in the afterlife. And so in my young mind, I just thought this is all silly. But as I get older, you begin to think about the reality that the end is coming. And what will that be? What will the end be like? And what of all of this stuff? And so that's what we're going to dig into this morning is this notion that all of us will eventually stop breathing and we will leave this earth. And all of the stuff that we've accumulated, what will happen to it? And what is our relationship to the acquisition of stuff now while we're alive later on in life? So the title of the message is Live the Final Audit in Mind. Now, an audit is a business practice, right? It's this idea of this outside organization, this accounting firm, who you invite to come in and to review your books as a business to ensure that what you say has come in as your income and what you say has gone out as your expenses all align so that you know within your business that somebody's not stealing or misplacing or misabusing and misusing resources. And so the idea to this message is to say that there will be a final audit, and when we arrive at the final audit, how's it going to go? How's it going to go? The text this morning that we'll be looking at is Luke chapter 12. It's a long text, verse 13 through verse 34. And if you have a Bible, I invite you to turn there. And this is a story. It's an interaction. Luke tells us that Jesus one day was gathered with thousands of people around him. As the beginning of Luke 12 tells us that the crowd was so large that people were actually trampling over each other. So this massive crowd of people, Jesus is teaching them on various things, one of which he talks about this idea that you should fear God because your life will eventually end. And amidst this conversation, too, in which he's instructing them about the Pharisees and being aware of the Pharisees, there's somebody in the crowd of these thousands of people who calls out to Jesus and says this. Or someone in the crowd who said to him, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." And Jesus replied, "Man, who appointed me a judge or an arbitrator between you?" So this is interesting, right? So there's two brothers. Apparently, mom died, dad died, and rather than have the Ferrari buried with them, the Ferrari was not buried, and now they're discussing who gets the Ferrari. And the one brother is like, this isn't right because my older brother, he's taken it. He's taken all the assets. And so why don't you, a rabbi, so this is an important Jewish concept here. Legally, when people had an issue, they had to have it resolved, and often they would take their problem, their legal issue, to a rabbi to ask and seek their wisdom and their direction. Old Testament concept, right, was to appoint judges. So Moses appointed many judges to assist him in the leadership of the nation. And so it's a similar concept here. And so it's not it's not so odd that somebody would ask a rabbi, "Hey, can you help me resolve this situation?" And so somebody from the crowd, this is important, pay attention to who Jesus talks to. Somebody in the crowd calls out, and then Jesus says to the man, "Who appointed me a judge?" In other words, why are you dragging me into this? And I'm going to stay out of it, actually. Because you see what happens next. Next, he says to them, He says to them. So it's like Pastor Joe's the guy. He calls out and he says to me, and so I say to him, and then I look to everybody. Jesus looks to everybody and he speaks to everybody this. He says, watch out, be on your guard against all kinds of greed, which was what we talked about last week, right? Jesus says, be aware of all kinds. There's multiple ways that you might be greedy. Be on guard against all kinds of greed. And then he makes this statement. He says, a man's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions. That's an important truth statement. We'll come back to that. And then Jesus told them this parable. So after he makes this statement, he goes on and tells a story. The ground of a certain rich man, important, his ground produced a good crop. And he thought to himself, what should I do? I have no place to store my crops. I got so much crops. I've amassed so much wealth. What am I going to do with it? Then he said, I know what I'll do. I will tear down my barns. I'll build bigger ones. And there I will store all of my grain and my goods. Seems like a good business move. Makes a lot of sense. And I'll say to myself, let's retire. You have plenty of good things laid up for many years. Take life easy, eat, drink, and be merry. That's very much the mentality of retirement, isn't it? I eventually hope to retire. A long ways out. But isn't this we need to be careful. We need to be very careful as we look to and think about retirement, because this is what our society teaches us that retirement is, right? You have plenty of good things. You've worked hard. You put it in your 401k. You've amassed it. Why? So you can sit back, right? Take life easy, eat and drink and be merry. Doesn't seem all bad. But maybe it's not all right either. Because Jesus goes on and says, but God said to him, you fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you. And then who will get what you have prepared for yourself? This is how it will be with anyone who stores up for himself, but is not rich towards God. And then he makes this other statement. And notice who he's speaking to here. He goes from talking to a man, to talking to the crowds, to talking to his small group, his disciples. And he says to them, therefore, I tell you, don't worry about your life. Don't worry about what you're going to eat, or about your body, or what you will wear. For life is more than food, and the body more than clothes. And then he goes on and he gives a bunch of interesting illustrations. And then we're going to just jump down to verse 33. And he gives this admonition then, again, still speaking to his disciples. And he says to them, sell your possessions, give to the poor, provide purses for yourselves that will not wear out, a treasure in heaven. A treasure in heaven that will not be exhausted, where no thief comes near and no moth destroys. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. And then he continues on and he tells this interesting story. Be dressed and ready for service, and keep your lamps burning like a man waiting for his master to return from a wedding banquet, so that when he comes and he knocks, and you can immediately open the door for him. And he says a few more things. It goes down and it wraps it all up at verse 40. You also must be ready, because the Son of Man will come at an hour when you do not expect him. The Son of Man will come at an hour when you do not expect him. This is a fascinating, interesting teaching about money, about our attitude towards money, it's about a lot of things. And as we kind of begin to take this passage apart, we'll talk about four things and talk about them fairly quickly. And in many ways, this is a very simple message, not very complex. But the first point to observe from this teaching of Jesus is this, that I'm going to have a final audit. You're going to have a final audit. Everybody is going to have a final audit, right? Jesus says in the story that he, constructs of this guy who amasses all of this stuff, who decides he's going to sit back, relax. Jesus says to the man, well, God demands of your life tonight. Your life comes to an end. All of us will experience that, right? We'll have a final day. We sang earlier, 10,000 reasons to sing our praise, right? And there's a phrase in there as we move to the last verse of that song about, in that time when I know that my time is drawing to an end. Even in that moment, the song says, I will still sing of your praises. A final day is coming for all of us. We don't know when that will be. We may be planning to do all kinds of things. We may be as that man thinking about and planning for our retirement. We may be full of health and energy and vigor and all kinds of seemingly we're alive. And then like that, it's over. Now, I've been contemplating this probably more than ever in my entire life. And I suppose that's part of what happens when you get to be 56 years old. You've lived now long enough that the people who are close to you in life, they begin to die. And so in the past couple of years that has happened. We have buried my father-in-law, my brother-in-law at the young age of 60. And what I want to talk about right now is about the death of my father. February 25th, right, next slide here, there's an image of father and I. So this picture was taken in 2011. It's the graduation of my doctoral program. And February 25th of 2023, so just last February, I was talking to my dad. He was like, I replay this over and over in my mind so often. See him sitting on his couch, and we're talking about several different things. My granddaughter happened to be over. I got her on, had a little chat with her. And the last thing I said to my dad was, see you on Thursday. See you on Thursday. Our entire family was planning to go for vacation and to do that with my mom and my dad. It was the last thing I said to my dad. I'll see you on Thursday. On Monday, February 27th, he breathed his last. Suddenly, just like that, he walked into the bedroom where my mom was, and he slumped over and died instantly. Had a massive brain hemorrhage. And in that moment, he breathed his last. His final audit. His life on earth, done. The reality is that is true for all of us. We all will breathe our last. And in our culture and in our society, we probably don't think about it very much. We certainly value being young, way over the notion of being older. But this is a reality, and we must deal with it. We must confront it. We must reflect on it. We must think about it. Jesus says there's going to be a final audit. Now, remember, this is a teaching about money, though, right? And so the next thing that we see in this text is that the final audit is not based on the size of your bank account, right? It's not based on the size of the bank account. Jesus says to him, kind of like tongue-in-cheek, to the man, or to the crowd, or to the man who dies in the story, right? So you've amassed all of this. You've got big barns, you've got lots of toys, you filled your barns full of tractors and ATVs and boats and trailers and pickup trucks and all kinds of stuff, and your bank account's got full, it's got lots of money. You've got big barns, you've got lots and lots of things, right? But your life is going to be demanded of you. Tonight, that's it. It's done. And then it's very interesting. He says, then what's going to happen to your stuff? In other words, when you're gone, you don't even know what happens to your stuff. Right now, you're all wrapped up in your stuff. And the story, I'm going to amass it, I'm going to collect it, I'm going to sit back, I'm going to take life easy, I'm going to find comfort and safety in all of this stuff that I have. I'll be able to dictate and control the future of my life. And Jesus says, no, that's the wrong perspective on your money. Because instantly you could be gone. And when you're gone instantly, so what? Like all your stuff, it's left. What's going to happen? Who's going to divide it? And who's going to look like the guy in the crowd who asked the question? Right? And you're going to get into a fight over the inheritance of the stuff. Jesus says, no, it's not about the stuff, right? He goes on further to say, a man's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions. Or actually, that's where he begins, right? A man's life does not consist in the abundance of possessions. And later on, he talks about life is more than food, and the body is more than clothing. You find a lot, it's not based on how much you have. Now, this past April, I found myself in my parents' house, the home that I grew up in as a kid from 4th grade on. And so there it is. It's that nice, all bright, that's what the realtor does to sell the house. And I look at those shrubs in the front, those 3 pointy things that are so out of control, and the bottom halves are all eaten because that's what the deer ate during the winter. And anyways, that's the house I grew up in. And we went there to get it prepared to sell, to which it sold. But the top right is just kind of like stuff that had been moved into the garage. The top left is all the stuff that had been just kind of stuck in the family room. It's just lots and lots of stuff. And then the bottom right is this dumpster in which a bunch of the stuff went into. And then the bottom left is this image of a diploma. I remember that picture of me and my dad. I also have a diploma. It's hanging on my wall downstairs. Go to the next slide, please. So I'm the one who put that diploma, my dad's diploma, in that garbage can. In a moment, it was like, we're just going, there's so much stuff. There's an abundance of stuff. And it's got to get cleaned out. It's got to get taken care of. And it's just one of the things that went in. And then I came back by it, and I just saw that sitting there. I'm like, how dare I do that? Like, how can I just throw my dad's diploma in a garbage can? This represents years worth of study, working on his MBA at Rochester Institute of Technology. That diploma, that degree enabled him to do certain things in his career. And I just threw it in the garbage. And it's just something that was inside of me. It's just like, wow, like, what am I going to do with it? It's just a piece of paper, right? What do you do with it? And what do I do with all the other stuff? I can't take all their stuff and put it in my house. But it feels so wrong to take my parents' stuff and put it into a waste management dumpster. And yet the reality is that my dad didn't take any of that stuff with him. It all got left behind. His final audit isn't based on the acquisition of all this stuff. It all got left. And what a heart-wrenching reality to make these decisions and to have to process and to deal with that. And many of you are walking this road and have done that, and you know what it's like. And some of you will be doing that at some point for your parents. And you will be dealing with the reality. There's a final audit, but it's not based on the size of your bank account. Because Jesus goes on, right? He goes on and he talks about how you fool, and the fool is this. It's the man who thought that life was based on the amassing of all of this stuff. And he says, your life's demanded of you, right? And your problem was you were not rich towards God. You were rich towards yourself. The problem is this: you were greedy, you hoarded, you collected, you amassed. You kept all of these things for yourself. You didn't think of God. You didn't think that your life you could live your life completely independent of God. Wrong. Your life is so much bigger than the accumulation of this stuff. And instead, he says, your final audit's based on how much treasure you amass in heaven. It's a heavenly treasure. What you give to God, your attitude towards God. But then note what he says in verse 33. Provide these purses that won't wear out, a treasure in heaven. It's interesting. So it's an eternal treasure. Your final audit is based on an eternal treasure. The eternal treasure is linked to the selling of your possessions and giving to the poor, and it's also linked towards your attitude towards God. And so we all must be confronted with this question: what is my attitude about the stuff that God has given to me? And it kind of goes all the way back to the first message in this series, in which we said, you shall honor the owner, right? You shall recognize that all you have has been given to you from the owner, from God. God is the owner. He's given you your resources. Be grateful for what he's given to you. Manage it and steward it well, not for here and now, but for eternal purposes. And so, of course, the next question comes is, what does that look like to store up treasures in heaven? And what are these eternal purposes? And how is it that I live for the future rather than living for now? And how do I take my money and do that? Well, back to the message that Mac taught week 5 in the series, being generous. The message that Sam taught and giving to those who are in need, and to the message that Matt taught on not showing favoritism, but and not caring only for or treating all people equal. Right? These ideas of storing up heavenly treasure look like living out these principles. And so let us be a people who don't amass stuff and have a wrong perspective of what stuff is, but to use it for heavenly treasure. I'm going to invite our worship team to come back up. Just lastly, the last, fourth and final point is to observe is that Jesus concludes by telling this story, right, of this master who goes away and these servants, and how these servants need to be prepared because they don't know when their master is going to return. And he concludes the story by just simply saying to the crowd, be ready. Your final audit's coming. But you don't know when that final audit is going to be. You have no idea when it's going to be. So be ready. Be ready. In other words, get ready now. Be ready now. And part of being ready for the final audit is this. It is to recognize that there will be life after death. In fact, that when I breathe my last breath here, I take my first breath in the presence of Jesus. And it is there where I will live eternally, here, brief, 80 years if I'm lucky, maybe 100. The oldest person just recently died at 119. So minuscule in comparison. And store up eternal treasures. So the question is, are you ready? Am I ready now? And part of being ready now looks like being a person who understands that the end of my life, it ends with an audit. God will either say, come and be with me, or depart from me to everlasting punishment. It's the work of Jesus, and we're going to celebrate this right now. There's bread and there's juice on the side tables, and I'm going to invite you in just a moment to come and to receive the bread and the juice. And the bread and the juice picture for us the means to being ready. See, the bread and the juice represent the body and blood of Jesus. The significance of the body and blood of Jesus is this, that Jesus died. God in flesh died because the wages of sin is death. For all people, the wages of sin is death. God took upon himself a physical body and died a physical death. And in so doing, the perfect righteous man took all of the sin of all the imperfect, unrighteous men and women upon himself. And for anyone who can identify and say, that is reality, and I recognize that, and I say, Jesus, take my sin. Jesus promises to take the wages of our sin. Are you ready? Are you ready if you get in your car and drive down the road and there is an accident and you breathe your last? Are you ready? Get ready. Bread and juice, I invite you to come and take it back to your seat, reflect for a few moments, and then we'll take it together and give thanks for what Jesus has done for us. Please come. I so greatly appreciate celebrating communion together the way that we do. It's you got out of your seat, you walked over to a table, and you picked up a piece of bread and a cup of juice. You acted. And we need to act. It's one of the things that I appreciate about the way we celebrate communion. It's a choice to get out of my seat and to go, and it symbolizes, and it also says that there's something I need to do. I need to do something to be made right before God. It also reminds us that we're all in this together, right? There's not one of us in this room that's perfect. Every one of us sin. Every one of us mess up. Every one of us get off course. We do what's wrong. And we also acknowledge that every one of us, we can't fix it on our own. We need Jesus to take our sin. And then we look forward to what it means for us to ultimately someday to be in a whole healthy body and to finally live a perfect life. It's coming in the future. But it's a beautiful thing for us to celebrate this together, to remind ourselves that our hearts get all twisted and tangled and confused about how to live life. And money is such a big part of it. And we just get going wrong ways. And hearing what Jesus has to say week in and week out over the past 10 weeks is a really good thing to help expose that, all of this sin, and to recognize and to receive his forgiveness for all the wrong ways. So as we take this bread, let's remember all four Gospels They all recount the story. Paul in 1 Corinthians 11 recounts the story in which Jesus was gathered with his disciples, the 12 of them, final night of his life. He broke bread, passed it around, and he said, take this and eat it. In remembrance of me, of my body, broken for you, me taking your sin. Let's eat it together. After the bread, he took the cup and he said, this is a picture of my blood shed for you to cover your sin. Let's drink all of it. Jesus, thank you. You're the smartest person. You have the most insight. You have the most wisdom. You understand the best way to live life. And you have such a way of speaking and saying things to expose our hearts and all the wrong ways that our hearts get going. Thank you for this teaching this morning. I also thank you that you make possible for us to be ready for your return. Thank you for taking the penalty for our sin. Thank you for the promise of the Spirit who comes and lives within and enables us to live out these truths. Help us as your people to do that, to live with the final audit in mind. We pray these things in your name, Jesus. Amen.
Amen. Would you please stand and let's just declare together that Jesus has rose and we're clean and pure spiritually, and yeah, let's just declare that together.
I was buried beneath my shame. Who could carry that kind of weight? It was my turn till I met you. I was breathing but not alive. All my failures I tried to hide. It was my turn till I met you. You called my name and I ran out of that grave, out of the darkness into your glorious day. You called my name, then I ran out of that grave, out of the darkness into your glorious day.
Hope Community Church, as you go, just two things really quick. One is this: if you have any questions about conversations from our congregational meeting back in April, there's a packet of info right here. Elders are available in the kitchen right now. Feel free to stop by. And secondly, next Sunday, when you show up, this space will be set up differently. There's going to be tables, and there's going to be pastries, and there's going to be all kinds of things. It's going to be a special morning. So we'll tell you more about that next Sunday when you get here. Just wanted you to have a heads up ahead of time, though. We'll see you then.